Ed Acosta here, sailing vessel Evergreen. I figured I would do a little tech video about flushing toilets with a waste tank and comparing them to composting toilet. The reason why I thought this would be of value to many people is because I'm sure you've seen the videos, right? If you Google it, you'll find tons of videos, but they all seem to follow the same script, which is invariably they'll tell you that what you need to be doing is throwing away your flushing toilet with your waste tank and replacing that by a composting toilet because it has all the benefits and none of the cons. Well, for those of us that have a little bit of gray hair, when something is too good to be true, it probably is. So in my case, for my boat, what I decided to do is instead of replacing that old flushing toilet, I decided to add a second toilet. And I decided to make that a composting toilet. And so I figured that what I would do is over a couple years, compare and contrast the two technologies and figure out what the real pros and cons are. And I figured that I would share that with you today so you can make your own decisions. So here we are in the head of our sailboat here, sailing vessel Evergreen. And this is what the boat came with. It came with an electric flushing toilet with all installation and waste tank. And so as you can see my opinion is one of the key pros of the electric flushing toilet. It looks very similar to the one at home. And so I'll tell you right now, it has big implications when it comes to guests, because guests want easy, right? They want something they are familiar with. They're probably not very familiar with quirky technology of boats, and so they want ideally the same thing they get at home. And this looks very much like the one at home. It flushes just like the one at home. It looks very similar. The only thing that's peculiar, obviously, is that we have these buttons right here on the side, on the right, where you can flush it or flood it, which is a little bit different than home. But for the most part, one of the key pros of the electric flushing toilet is that it can operate very similar to the one at home. You can pee on it, you can poo on it, just like you do at home, no different. So guests, what I've learned over the last 2 years that I've been using both technologies, guests, when given a choice, tend to choose this one because this one is similar to the one at home. So keep that in mind. Second point on the electric flushing toilet is one of the bigger cons of this type of technology, right? Which is you need at least 2 pumps to operate. One pump to flood the toilet, another pump to the macerator that removes the waste from the toilet. You need a selector valve, you need all kinds of piping in the back, which in our boat is right here to my right. And you need a waste tank, which is in the bilge in the case of my boat. And then you need various seacocks, right, to take the water and to release the water to the ocean if you're in compliance with the United States Coast Guard regulations, or to your waste tank if you're in a no discharge zone. So there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes, right? So that's definitely a con. Probably the most advertised con of the electric flushing toilet is the fact that you have to operate with a constant tank. You have to check the level of that tank. You have to arrange for pump outs very frequently if you're using it often. So that's definitely a con. There's no question about it. However, keep that in mind that when you're taking care of the waste on an electric flushing toilet, you never come in any way close or in contact with your waste. That's going to become important when we talk about the composting toilet. Yes, you have to arrange for pump outs, but everything is a little more ascetic, to call it somehow. You do not have to come in any kind of proximity to your waste. So here I am in the V-berth of my boat, and as I mentioned earlier, right here there was like a bench of sorts, maybe meant for maybe shoes or something like that. So I decided it would be a perfect place to locate a composting toilet. And I'm not going to mention any brands because, quite frankly, again, this is not a brand commercial. I'm certainly not sponsored by any kind of manufacturer. This is not so much about brands, it's about the technology per se. So anyway, I installed this composting toilet. And so as you can see, one of the pros of this technology, right, is that it's pretty much self-contained, I should say. Meaning there's no complicated electric system that needs to go along with it. It does not draw water from anywhere, so you don't have to worry about seacocks or pumps or anything like that. It's pretty much what you see here. The only thing that you don't see, which is definitely which is present here, is that there needs to be a little tube, which in my case is right here, that provides for aeration. So there's a little fan that needs to go somewhere to vent the air from this container to allow for the composting process to happen. The bacteria that it's here taking care of your waste needs constant air. So that's the small little thing that needs to happen in the back end of this. In my case, I elected to vent that tube not to the outside, but rather to the anchor compartment, in my case, which is vented outside, which is basically open to the outside through a hole for the water. So I felt like I didn't want to make a hole in the hull of the boat. I elected to vent it into the locker, anchor locker compartment, which is one of the recommendations from the vendor. And so I was very happy with that installation as is. One of the important benefits of this technology is that it's literally odorless. There is no smell with this technology. The composting happens in the back side of this, and then your pee goes in this tank right here, but it's completely odorless. I mean, I've never smelled anything in this place. So one big pro, no smell. The flushing toilet and the piping behind it over time will eventually develop smell, right? Because of the scaling process that happened between salt water and human urine. So that's definitely a con of the system. It's a pro on this one. In addition, the nice thing about this is that the composting doesn't need to be pumped out, right? I would say for a two-person crew like my wife and me, we can go for an extended period of time without really needing to do much to the composting. It's a couple of coconut bricks that you mix with the right amount of moisture, and it just works. It's pretty amazing to see it happen. So we're very happy with that aspect of it, meaning how long you can go without having to do any maintenance to it. However, let's talk about one of the cons of this technology. That is that you will need to take care of the pee though. The pee does accumulate, right? And there's no magic to compost that. So this needs to be discarded, you know, and so the manufacturer brings in a little cap you can put on this tank, and you can transport it, hopefully elegantly covered by some sort of a bag, and then you can flush it in a marina toilet, or you can flush it back at home, however you may. So that's an important detail. Evacuating the pee from this tank is going to put you in contact with your waste, even if it's for a brief moment while you put the cap on. Just removing it from here and putting the cap on, it's going to make you feel a little bit nauseous sometimes. So those that kind of claim that, oh, this is all perfect, well, it's not, right? The flushing toilet doesn't force you at any point in time to come into any proximity with your waste. This one will. I mean, you will have to take this tank out of here, and when you do that, you're going to smell that smell that you never smell on normal operation. You're going to smell it then, and then you're going to have to empty this tank and then clean it up with some vinegar or something. So that process is not pleasant, right? So just keep that in mind. That will have to happen. Even the composting toilet that is on the back, right, where your waste goes, your poo goes, even though, yes, it's odorless and you, for the most part, don't have to ever see your waste, the fact of the matter is every now and then you have to check on the humidity level of the material there. You don't want it to be too dry or too moist. So every now and then you have to check on how the moisture is coming along. So it's almost like keeping some sort of it's like keeping a mix that you have to maintain within certain ranges over time to make sure that the composting goes well. Okay, so pros and cons real quick. Flushing toilet, the pros, number one, the similarity to the toilets at home, which generally will lend themselves really well for guests. Very minimal instructions you need to give them. Just simply, hey, don't flush toilet paper down it. That's about it. Everything else is somewhat intuitive. Second, it never puts you in contact during normal operation with your waste in any way, shape, or form. So that's kind of good if you're one of those persons that just can't stand that kind of thing. And then thirdly, like we mentioned earlier, it's generally good for guests in terms of their own choice, meaning they'll tend to choose that if they hear the complex explanation of that you have to do on the composting toilet, where you have to tell males, look, you need to sit down on it, just make sure your pee goes on those little two holes that are in the front. None of that, right? You just tell them, sit there, do your business normal, just please don't throw toilet paper on it. So all those are pros of the flushing toilet. Let's talk about cons of the flushing toilet. We talked about number one, the complexity. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that need to work for that toilet in general to work. If the pump that pumps in the seawater to flush it doesn't work, the toilet becomes inoperative. If the macerator that takes the waste out, which is also electrical, doesn't work, toilet becomes an imperative. If for whatever reason you or your guest forgets and sends toilet paper down it and it clogs the 1-inch pipe that comes out of it, toilet becomes an imperative. If for whatever reason your waste tank gets full, toilet becomes an imperative until you find a pump out boat that can come in and empty your tank. So all those are cons of the flush and toilet. In addition, we got the smelly pipes that we talked about. That's going to be an issue that's going to get worse over time. So regularly, in a matter of years, you're going to have to replace those pipes, which is definitely not a fun operation. And then regular pump outs, right? As you use it, you're probably not going to be able to go more than a week and a half maybe for a crew of 2 or 3. You're going to have require those pump outs. You're going to have to be planning that as you do your cruises to make sure that there is pump out available wherever you're going. Or you need to sail 3 miles offshore or wherever the distance may be based on Coast Guard regulations to be able to pump it out at sea. But that usually requires quite a distance. And in many cases, I've heard of people that literally have to plan a cruise out offshore to do nothing but that because they can't find a pump up boat. So it definitely is going to affect your planning in terms of being able to have that ability to evacuate your waste tank, which the composting toilet will never require. And then the flushing toilet, the fact that you cannot flush toilet paper in your flushing toilet is also an issue, right? It's the only caveat really when it comes to use it, but it's a big one, right? Because people are not used to having to dispose their toilet paper in a separate compartment, and that's becomes cumbersome, quite frankly, admittedly, when it comes to your guests. And then finally, the fact that it doesn't have an ability to process, a big capacity of waste. That is not an issue with the composting toilet. The composting toilet will literally process anything you throw at it. Now, granted, if you have a very big crew, that will become a problem. But for a crew of 2 or 3 or maybe even 4, quite frankly, a regular composting toilet generally handles that very well. So in summary, those are kind of the pros and cons of the flushing toilet. So let's talk about the composting toilet. The pros, number 1, simplicity. It doesn't require a whole bunch of pumps, seacocks, and piping. It requires only 1 pipe for aeration and minimal electricity to power a small fan. And quite frankly, if that fan fails, you got plenty of time to replace it. It's not going to impair the operation of the toilet. So it's a very reliable unit, and it's going to allow you to keep that working usually under most circumstances. Secondly, it's odorless. So you're not going to have to worry about it getting smelly over time or anything like that. That's a big plus. Thirdly, it doesn't require any pump outs. Although we did talk about, and we can segue into the cons with that, it does have a similar pump out situation, which is that you have to empty the P tank. That will need to be evacuated regularly. And so that will produce a little bit of a planning that you're going to have to do. However, that planning pales in comparison to the kind of complexity and issues that are involved in the pump out of the waste tank of the flushing toilet. So even though both require some sort of evacuation of waste, the level of complexity and coordination required for the composting toilet is far less than that of the flushing toilet. Regarding the cons of the composting toilet system, number 1, the fact that it's, again, very different from the one at home, right? Especially for males, it requires to tell them that they need to sit down to pee because it's almost impossible to aim for the 2 little holes where the pee goes. So that requires a little bit of training. It also requires to explain to them they need to open the compartment for the poo and so on and so forth. So basically, it requires some sort of training for people that are unaccustomed to, and that will be particularly important for guests. Less so for you as a crew member or your regular crew that sail with you. Secondly, the fact that it kind of requires a pump out of sorts, meaning you have to evacuate the P tank. Like we talked about before, it's a lot simpler than having to coordinate a pump out with a pump out boat for the flushing toilet. But still, it's going to be a regular occurrence, and it's not a pleasant one because it does put you in contact with your waste, however briefly. And then thirdly, the fact that you do have to kind of maintain a little bit of that humidity of the composting material, whether it's the coconut bricks or whether it's some other combination that people use. There's all various different materials that people use, peat moss and stuff like that. I mean, I've heard of various different materials. We mostly use the coconut bricks. But that's a factor. I mean, every now and then you will have to inspect that and kind of make sure that it doesn't become too dry or too moist. And once again, they'll put you in contact with your waste, however briefly. So something to keep in mind. So in conclusion, where do we land on these two different technologies? Having looked a little bit about the pros and cons of both. To be perfectly honest with you, I would say that both of them have pros and cons, right? A lot of people hate the pump outs on the flushing toilet, but let's face it, the composting toilet also requires some sort of a pump out, which is you have to empty that pee tank. Granted, you don't require the assistance of a pump out boat, and you don't require that complexity, but you still have to somehow get rid of that pee, and that will be a smelly process. And so both of them have their cons. I would say that in balance, after 2 years of having the two different technologies in our boat, our conclusion is that we kind of need both. They both kind of complement each other. And I think that's the biggest conclusion, if you take anything out of this video, is that we believe that these two technologies are complementary. Guests will tend to like the flushing toilet, and you will kind of like to direct them to it, quite frankly, because otherwise, if they want to use the composting toilet, you kind of have to give them a training, right? Males will have to pee sitting down on that toilet because the pee tank is in the front of the toilet. So that's not going to be natural or trivial to someone that's not used to that. As a matter of fact, the first time I used a composting toilet on a friend's boat, I misunderstood the instructions. I did not understand that I had to sit on it to pee. So that's going to happen to other guests that you're going to have. So given all this, what should you choose? Well, I think it really depends on certain aspect of you as a person. For example, if having to at some point have to smell your own urine when you're trying to empty the tank of the composting toilet is a huge no-no, then everything else we might say about that technology is irrelevant, right? If that's a huge showstopper for you, then please don't select the composting toilet, because you will have to do that regularly. And I know my wife and I don't enjoy that particular part of that particular technology. On the other hand, if you're someone who just cannot accept that your pipes for your flushing toilet are going to be smelly, then that also may be a huge showstopper for you, because those pipes will become smelly over time. So as you can see, it really depends on what are you able to live with as a person. On the other hand, if you never want to experience the situation of a clogged flushing toilet, which, look, it happened to me and it happens to everybody. At some point, some guests will forget about the toilet paper and flush it, or something to that effect, and you are going to be the one who has to unclog that toilet. If you do not want to ever have that experience, then the composting toilet is right for you. If you, on the other hand, don't want to deal with the complexity of multiple pumps that need to all be working for this flushing toilet to work, if you don't want to deal with all those moving parts and just want something that you know is pretty much going to work 99.9% of the time, if reliability is all about what you're all about when it comes to the toilet, then yeah, the composting toilet has only one thing that needs to work, which is the fan that provides aeration for the composting mix. And even, quite frankly, even if that fails, you still have plenty of time to go find a spare. It's not going to impair the use of the toilet. And so those are kind of the decision factors that may play. It really depends very much on you as a person, what you can live with. What I was hoping in this video is that I would give you a sense of a very balanced view of both technologies. That none of the two are perfect. Both has pros and cons. But I'm hoping that by exposing all of the pros and cons, you will be able to know what rings true for you and make a choice if you're not able to have two toilets. I would definitely say if you have the room like I did, I would strongly recommend you have one of each. I think that there's definitely a benefit to that, like I mentioned here, particularly when it comes to guests.